And we're going to be hearing about possible alternatives to FTAs in this panel. We have 4 speakers. I would like to give a warm welcome to Emiliano Brancaccio, who is a professor at the Sannio University. We're both from southern Italy, so it's a double pleasure for me to welcome him here today. We both voted in favour of defending the constitution that was born of the Italian resistance and has led to political change in Italy. We believe that our constitution actually also is opposed to the current thinking on free trade agreements. So it's with great pleasure that I give the floor to Emiliano, because I know that we can share in celebrating this result. Yes, so we've made JP Morgan unhappy. And that makes us happy.
Speak in Italian, and I will follow this text with just slight changes, okay? You should have this text. Una premessa.
So one thing before we begin. There is a very strong link between the movement of goods, the movement of capital, and monetary regimes. And this is something that is going to be the focal point of what I have to say. So, this conference is entitled Resistance and Alternatives to Free Trade. And I think that this is a very relevant issue at present. However, we need to be clear in saying that free trade has been in a crisis for several years now. If you look at the data between 2008 and today, 1,196 new measures to limit free trade between G20 countries have been introduced. And we've seen a rise of 12% in the total number of restrictions applied to international capital movements. So these restrictive measures were adopted not only by relatively small countries such as Malaysia or Argentina, but also by huge countries such as Russia, India, China, and, above all, the United States of America. If we just look at 2014 and 2015, the United States engaged in 385 anti-dumping investigations, and this gave rise to several cases of retaliation vis-à-vis competing countries. So Trump is talking about this left, right and centre, whereas Obama perhaps preferred to just whisper it. But if you look at American policy, you can see that this protectionist wind, which is blowing across the country, has been gaining ground for some time. So the current fight between the proponents of free trade and protectionists is an internal fight within the capitalist class. So you have a fight between strong capital, which is trying to knock down customs barriers, and then you have weak capital, which is defending itself by erecting barriers. So in this fight, work is not at the forefront of people's minds, but is on the back burner. So work, in a sense, has been cannon fodder here in terms of globalisation, and therefore there is a risk that Labour will not actually benefit from a new protectionist phase. However, as I will try and explain, this heavier internal fight actually is a golden opportunity for trade unions, for the left, and for social emancipation movements. It is a chance for us to actually step up to the plate. But in order to pursue this objective, what progressive proposals do we need to table? What political agenda should we gather around? So I would like to draw to your attention a proposal which, in its various national guises in France, Italy, and in other countries, has already led to the emergence of a very interesting debate and has actually reached a political consensus. I would like to define this proposal as the International Social Standard on Monetary Policy. So with this phrase, I'm referring to a new idea of managing economic relations between countries, both within and outside of Europe, which is based primarily on the reintroduction of controls on capital movements and, if necessary, on the movement of goods. So the main thing that's new here is these controls on capital movements, which are to be introduced especially to countries which have competition policies which bring down wages, social rights and environmental rights, and as a consequence lead to the emergence of trade imbalances. The adoption of a social standard on monetary policy implies controls on capital movements from and to countries which accumulate a trade surplus via internal social dumping, or countries which compensate social dumping, internal social dumping, by getting into greater debts. So economic relationships would actually then be governed by common decisions. So you would avoid this race to the bottom in terms of wages. So capital controls actually would protect countries which adhere to the social standard against countries which engage in social dumping and therefore accentuate macroeconomic imbalances. The social standard on monetary policy is not something that we've plucked out of thin air. No, it brings together the concept of labour standard, which was drawn up by the ILO, and the weak currency clause, which is still present in the statute of the International Monetary Fund. So if you bring these two measures together, the social standard actually connects the problem of macroeconomic rebalancing between nations to the political issue of the international development of social struggles. Now, it's clear that this proposal of a social standard for monetary policy is located at a very high level of political management, and we know that above and beyond the experience we've had with the Greek government, this is certainly not at the centre of people's attentions at the minute, but this is fertile ground because it enables the European left to come up with an alternative critical position to counter those put forward by the proponents of free trade. And it enables us to move away from this for and against the euro debate. And this is a very sterile, banal debate which actually threatens to split us apart irredeemably. So this is not the time nor the place to actually go into the technical details of this proposal, but I would just like to quickly list the characteristics which I believe make this a very fertile proposal. So first of all, unlike the labour standard and the old social clauses, the social standard for monetary policy actually sanctions not the level of social rights, but their possible drop-off, and therefore it doesn't divide the northern countries from the southern countries. Secondly, this logical nucleus can actually be applied by one or many countries, even given the current standards of the European treaties, which actually look at capital movements. So you have an extensive interpretation of this, and this can actually then counteract divisive forces within the Union. And given that there's the spectre of a new Eurozone crisis, and I think that this is most definitely possible, the social standard for monetary policy can be a solid basis for suggesting a transition towards a better monetary regime. Fourthly, this is flexible. This social standard on monetary policy can be part of a multilateral agreement, but it can also be applied immediately by any single country and then rolled out in other countries on the basis of cooperation agreements. In conclusion, the idea of an international social standard on monetary policy can actually be a strong weapon against the rise of the xenophobic right, which has been growing for years and seeks to block immigration. But of course they don't say a single word about the far more important issue of the control of capital movements. So the xenophobic right is saying that we should arrest the immigrants. Well, okay, the left should then counter this by saying that we should arrest the capital, which, due to it being given free rein internationally, is actually fueling social dumping and macroeconomic chaos. So above and beyond globalist apologetics and working against the nationalist and xenophobic right, we can actually define a social standard for monetary policy, and this can be very much a building block for a new international model for labour. Thank you very much.
Ringrazio molto.